Now we're going to look at how to change a batch size when you're using a pre-ferment. It may seem complicated at first, but we just need to follow the steps. Remember, you don't eat an elephant in one bite, you eat it one bite at a time. So here is our same bread formula that we've been working with before, but this time we've got a pre-ferment in it. It's just like the one that you would see in the lab. We've got our the total dough weight, we've got the pre-ferment, and we've got our final dough. Notice, however, that yeast is really a lot less because we're pre-fermenting part of the dough. We don't need as much yeast overall. So this pre-ferment, we're going to treat it like it's its own formula. We'll get to that in just a minute. But first, let's figure out our new batch size, just like we've done before. So let's say we want to make 6 300-gram baguettes. So 6 times 300 grams, we're going to need 1,800 grams of dough. So how do we make a batch of 1,800 grams of dough? We've got to find our conversion factor. Desired batch size divided by total baker's percent. So desired batch size is 1,800 grams. Total baker's percent right here is 168.1. That comes out to 10.7. We're going to round that up. So our conversion factor is going to be 11. We're going to convert our batch size of the total recipe just as usual. So down here, we're going to be multiplying 100 times 11, so a total of 1,100 grams. Our water, 65 times 11, and that's going to give us 715 grams. Our instant yeast, the 0.5 times 11, we're going to have 5.5 grams of yeast. Our salt is 2 times 11, so we're going to have 22 grams of yeast. And our malt powder is 0.6. 0.6 times 11, 6.6 grams of our malt powder. That's going to be our base recipe. So now we want to look up here at our pre-ferment from our original recipe. And we want to determine how much flour is pre-fermented in that original recipe. We are going to divide the flour in the pre-ferment by the flour in the total recipe. And that's going to give us 375 grams divided by 1,255 grams gives us a figure of 29.8. So let's call that 30%. We're saying that 30% of the flour is pre-fermented in our original batch. So then we go to our new recipe down here, and we're going to look at what 30% of that flour is. 30% of the base recipe. So 1,100 grams times 30%. That's going to give us a figure of 330 grams. That's how much flour we're going to put into our new pre-ferment. Now, we want to treat the pre-ferment as its own formula, just like we've said here. We're going to calculate the baker's percent of the ingredients from our original pre-ferment recipe. Our flour in the pre-ferment is 375 grams. how do we calculate baker's percent? It's each ingredient divided by the total flour. So we're going to have 245 divided by 375. And that gives us a figure of 65%. Now remember, the flour is always 100%. So our water is 65%. To figure out the percentage for our yeast, we're going to take the 2.3 divided by 375, and that's going to give us a figure for our yeast of 0.6%. And for our salt, 7 grams divided by 375 gives us a percentage for our salt of 1.9%. We're not going to worry about the malt because the malt does not appear in the pre-ferment. We don't have to calculate that. Now we're going to plug those percentages into our new pre-ferment formula. If you're having trouble figuring out how to do this, we can use the little sort of triangle GPS to calculate it. If we consider that this line means divided by, this line means multiplied, right, like this. This is our ingredient weight. And down here, this is our flour, total flour weight. This is the sort of GPS for calculating baker's percent. And this is your percent in decimal form. So percent in decimal form. Okay, so what you can do is just cover up the section that you don't know, and that gives you the equation. So here we know that our flour is 330 grams. We don't know what our ingredient weight is, but we do know that the baker's percent is 65%. So to calculate, we're going to take 330, we're going to multiply it by that 65%, and that is going to give us a figure for our water of 214.5. We're going to do the same thing for our instant yeast. So we're multiplying the flour weight by the percent for the yeast, and that's going to give us a figure or weight for our yeast of 1.98 grams. And again, for our salt, it's going to be the flour times 1.9%, and that's going to give us a salt weight of 6.27 grams. Now, to figure out what we're going to do for our final dough, we're going to subtract our pre-ferment from our total dough weight. So it's going to be 1,100 minus 330. So in our final dough, we're going to use 770 grams of strong flour. We're going to subtract our water, so the 715 grams minus 214.5 grams. So we're going to be using 500.5 grams of water in our final dough. For our yeast, our total batch was 5.5 minus 1.98. So we're going to be using 3.52 2 grams of yeast in our final dough. And of course, the malt powder, because we're not using it in the pre-ferment, so 6.6 minus 0, 6.6 grams are going in there. For my salt, sorry, I skipped that part. 22 grams minus 6.27 grams. So we're going to have 15.73 grams of salt in our final dough. So obviously there's a number of steps to follow, but just be methodical, work your way through to convert your batch size using a pre-ferment, and you'll be absolutely fine.